April 1st, 1945. The sun had barely risen over Okinawa. Jagged cliffs rose from the earth, sheer faces of rock that seemed to scrape the sky. Below, the Japanese defenders were entrenched, their machine guns and artillery prepared for the American assault. Smoke and haze drifted from previous bombardments, softening the landscape in gray and orange. Amid the chaos, a young medic moved with quiet determination. Desmond Doss, unarmed, carried only his first aid kit and faith. Each step on the precarious ridge demanded focus. Bullets tore through the air, but he did not hesitate. Soldiers shouted, falling around him, but Doss knelt, bandaged, and lowered wounded men over the cliff edge with ropes. He climbed back up, again and again, ignoring exhaustion, fear, and injury above him. The Japanese gunners could not understand. How could one man, without a rifle, defy the rules of war and survive? How could he move with purpose where others froze or fled? And yet, in that smoke-filled morning, the answer was clear. Courage was not measured by the weapon you held, but the lives you chose to save. It was here, on the treacherous cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge, that Desmond Doss would earn a place in history not for killing, but for saving. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia, to a devout Seventh-day Adventist family. His father, a carpenter and World War I veteran, instilled discipline, work ethic, and a deep sense of duty. His mother, firm in her faith, nurtured a moral compass that would guide him through life. From a young age, Doss absorbed lessons of compassion, patience, and respect for life. Hunting, carpentry, and farm work taught him physical endurance. But it was religion that shaped his worldview. Killing was a sin even in the context of war, and he vowed to honor that belief. The world around Doss, however, was changing. The late 1930s brought increasing global tension. In Europe, Hitler's army swept through nations with devastating speed. In Asia, Japan expanded aggressively into China. News from distant lands filtered into American homes. The United States, still recovering from the Great Depression, maintained an uneasy peace. But military preparations began quietly. By 1941, it was clear that America could not remain isolated forever. For Doss, faith and duty converged in a unique way. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shocked the nation. Thousands of American servicemen were killed or injured, and the country immediately entered World War II. The call to serve was urgent, and young men across the nation faced a moral and practical choice: enlist, defer, or resist. Doss chose to serve, but on his own terms. He would enlist, not as a combatant wielding a rifle, but as a medic committed to saving lives. His decision was unprecedented, and many in his community could not understand it. In April 1942, Doss formally enlisted in the U.S. Army, assigned to Company B, 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division. He arrived at basic training with a singular mission: serve without compromising his religious convictions. It was here that his faith was tested. Drill instructors, conditioned to value aggression and compliance, viewed his refusal to carry a weapon as insubordination. Fellow soldiers, unfamiliar with his beliefs, doubted his courage and questioned his utility. He was called stubborn, naive, and unfit for service, yet Doss persevered. He carried only a first aid kit, often improvising with bandages and medical supplies. He trained rigorously, learning battlefield medicine, casualty evacuation, and survival skills. The Army reluctantly allowed him to continue, acknowledging his growing proficiency as a medic. His unarmed status made him an anomaly, a living question. Could a soldier survive and even thrive without ever firing a shot? By 1943, the 77th Infantry Division was deployed to the Pacific. Battles in Guam, Saipan, and Tinian were shaping the course of the war. The Japanese defenders were skilled and entrenched, familiar with tropical terrain, and motivated to hold territory at any cost. For Doss, the stakes were not only national, they were deeply personal. Each life he could save represented the ultimate moral victory, a testament that courage and faith could coexist even in the most brutal conflict. The challenges ahead would test every lesson from his childhood, every ounce of discipline, and every fiber of his faith. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define not only his military career, but the meaning of heroism itself. By 1944, Desmond Doss had arrived in the Pacific Theater, joining his unit in the islands captured from Japan. As the United States pushed closer to the Japanese homeland, the terrain was unforgiving: dense jungles, swamps, Coral cliffs and disease and heat claimed as many lives as enemy bullets. Doss, armed only with his first aid kit and unwavering faith, faced skepticism from fellow soldiers and commanding officers. Many wondered whether a man who refused to carry a weapon could survive the front lines, let alone perform effectively under fire. Early engagements in the Pacific, including Saipan and Guam, exposed him to the brutal realities of jungle warfare. Soldiers suffered under constant threat from ambushes, snipers, and artillery. Casualty rates were high. Doss distinguished himself not through aggression, but through relentless care. He moved among the wounded, providing immediate medical attention, often placing himself directly in the line of fire. His actions began to earn him quiet respect. Soldiers started to rely on his presence, knowing that those in his hands had a chance to survive. However, Doss's pacifist stance continued to draw criticism. Officers pressured him to carry a weapon to conform to traditional military expectations. Drill instructors had already labeled him insubordinate during training, and now, in the crucible of combat, his beliefs were tested further. Yet Doss remained resolute. He refused to compromise, relying instead on the discipline he had honed since childhood, and on the courage that faith alone had instilled in him. As the 77th Infantry Division prepared for the Battle of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest campaigns of the Pacific War, Doss's role as a medic became even more critical. Intelligence reported that Japanese forces had fortified the Maeda Escarpment, later known as Hacksaw Ridge. The cliffside positions were nearly impregnable, with interlocking fields of fire from machine guns, artillery, and sniper nests. Casualty projections were grim. Many soldiers expected high losses during the frontal assaults that lay ahead. Doss understood that the coming battle would push him beyond anything he had encountered before. For the first time, the principles he had lived by, faith, nonviolence, and selfless service, would collide directly with the chaos of combat. Unlike other soldiers, his measure of success would not be in enemy kills or territorial gains, but in the lives he could save amidst relentless carnage. As his division prepared to assault the cliffs of Okinawa, every man knew the dangers, but none more so than Doss, who carried no weapon to defend himself. The stage was set for a test of faith and courage that would become legendary, proving that heroism could exist even without firearms. The human cost of courage. Desmond Doss's heroism was not born from muscle or firepower, but from endurance, climbing steep ridges under enemy fire, moving across open terrain to reach the wounded, and facing relentless artillery required extraordinary physical and mental resilience. The human toll was immediate: exhaustion, blood loss, and constant fear of death. Yet Doss moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for soldiers in need. For him, courage was measured in the number of lives preserved, not in victories over the enemy. Each man he saved represented a triumph over chaos, a reaffirmation that even amid destruction, life could be protected. Fellow soldiers began to witness something remarkable: a single unarmed medic transforming despair into hope. 2. Faith and moral resolve. Essential to Doss's actions was his unshakable faith. His Seventh-day Adventist beliefs forbade him from taking life, a principle that placed him at odds with military norms. In moments of extreme danger, when others would reach for weapons, Doss prayed. Faith guided his decisions and steeled his nerves. This moral resolve became a source of inspiration. Soldiers who initially doubted him saw a man whose principles remained intact under fire, a living example. That strength could be defined by conviction, not aggression. His refusal to carry a weapon was not weakness. It was the foundation of his courage. Leadership without authority. Though Doss held no command position, his actions modeled leadership in the most profound sense. In the chaos of battle, he organized ad hoc rescue operations, directed ropes to lower wounded soldiers down cliffs, and coordinated movement across deadly terrain. Others followed his example, often rallying to assist him. Leadership here was not a matter of rank, it was the ability to influence, guide, and protect under circumstances that tested every human instinct. His presence altered the morale of the 77th Infantry Division, providing reassurance that someone was actively safeguarding life, even when death seemed inevitable. Tactical bravery. In the face of coast cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge presented an almost impossible battlefield. Japanese defenders had fortified the area with machine guns, mortars, and concealed artillery. Standard military doctrine would have prioritized suppression of enemy fire before evacuation. Doss, however, operated outside conventional tactics. He moved along exposed ledges, assessing casualties and improvising evacuation methods. Using ropes, stretchers, and sheer determination, he lowered wounded soldiers down cliffs one at a time. Each trip was calculated, measured, yet carried immense risk. His tactics were not textbook, they were born of necessity, courage, and an unflinching commitment to life. The technological edge and limitations unlike large-scale bombing or mechanized assaults. Doss's battlefield was defined by human skill and simple tools, first aid kits, stretchers, and ropes. Medical technology was limited. Morphine syringes, bandages, and splints were all he had to stabilize soldiers for evacuation. The simplicity of his tools contrasted sharply with the complexity of the battlefield. Every decision relied on judgment, speed, and improvisation. There was no radar to detect wounded, no artillery to suppress enemy fire, just one man, the injured, and his unwavering resolve. Enemy perspective shock and bewilderment Japan's defenders were unaccustomed to encountering a soldier who refused to fight yet persisted so relentlessly in saving lives. Observers noted his movements across exposed terrain, seemingly ignoring bullets and shells. From their perspective, Doss's courage was incomprehensible. They could not anticipate his pattern, nor could they understand why he risked himself without the intent to kill. This psychological impact, both awe and frustration, added an invisible dimension to the battle. It was not only a contest of arms, but a confrontation of values, where one soldier's principles challenged assumptions of fear and combat behavior. The moral force of example being battlefield heroics. Doss's actions created ripples among both American and Japanese forces. For his comrades, he redefined bravery, courage without violence. For his enemies, he was a source of confusion and psychological pressure. For civilians and historians, he embodied the possibility of ethical heroism in war. His story illustrates that warfare, while inherently violent, contains space for moral courage to assert itself. Decisions made on principle can shape outcomes as profoundly as those made with rifles or artillery. April 1, 1945. The morning sun barely touched the jagged cliffs of Hacksaw Ridge, casting long shadows over the Japanese defensive positions. The 77th Infantry Division had received orders to seize the ridge, a seemingly impregnable escarpment overlooking the island of Okinawa. Every foot of the slope was covered by interlocking fields of fire, machine guns positioned to sweep any exposed advance, and artillery zeroed on likely ascent routes. The first waves of soldiers surged upward, the ground trembling under the weight of shells, and men fell sometimes before reaching the first ledge. Desmond Doss arrived among the first medics on the scene. Unarmed, with nothing but his first aid kit and a rope, the cliff face offered little cover. Every movement exposed him to enemy bullets. Each step demanded both physical strength and precision, as a single misstep could mean a fatal fall. Yet Doss moved methodically, descending ropes to reach soldiers pinned on ledges, administering morphine, bandaging wounds, and stabilizing fractures. He coordinated evacuations under constant fire, sometimes returning to the ridge dozens of times in a single day. The Japanese defenders watched in bewilderment. How could a man repeatedly climb and descend exposed rock, unarmed, while others with rifles struggled to survive? His method was simple yet extraordinary: prioritize life, act with calm efficiency, and refuse to yield to fear. The ridge became a theater of human courage, a place where one man's moral conviction challenged the brutal calculus of war. By the end of the first assault, Doss had rescued dozens of wounded soldiers, many of whom would have otherwise perished. His actions forced his comrades and superiors to reconsider their assumptions about bravery and survival. Here, amid smoke, blood, and screaming, the nature of heroism was rewritten. It was not measured by enemy casualties, but by the lives preserved. The battle had only begun. The ridge would demand more than courage. It would demand endurance, ingenuity, and the unbreakable resolve of a man committed to saving every life he could reach. Over the following days, the fighting on Hacksaw Ridge escalated to a level few could have imagined. Japanese defenders unleashed wave after wave of gunfire, mortars, and grenades from fortified positions. American infantry climbed the cliffs under near-constant bombardment. Amid this chaos, Desmond Doss continued his relentless mission, saving lives while carrying no weapon, using ropes. He lowered soldiers over sheer cliffs, sometimes single-handedly supporting their weight as they hung in midair. Bullets zipped past him, and mortar shells shook the ground beneath his feet, yet he remained calm, precise, and focused. The wounded were often screaming, panicked, or too injured to move on their own. and Doss's strength and steady hands made the difference between life and death. By the end of one particularly grueling day, he had personally evacuated over 75 soldiers, a feat unmatched in the division and almost unheard of in military history. During one rescue, Doss himself was gravely injured. Shrapnel and bullets struck his body, and yet he refused medical evacuation. Every time he was carried off or attempted to rest, he returned to the ridge, driven by the knowledge that comrades remained in mortal danger. Soldiers who had once mocked or doubted him now followed his example, assisting with evacuations and forming ad hoc rescue chains inspired by his actions. The Japanese defenders, witnessing this unarmed man repeatedly defy their fire, were stunned. Their perception of the battlefield was disrupted. Morale wavered when they realized one man, without aggression, could move unharmed through zones they considered lethal. Their frustration was compounded by the fact that each soldier he saved reduced the effectiveness of their defensive strategy. By the conclusion of the Ridge assault, Doss had become a legend among his peers. Commanders recognized that his courage had not only preserved lives, but also provided a psychological advantage, stabilizing morale among troops in one of the bloodiest campaigns of the Pacific War. His unyielding faith, moral clarity, and extraordinary physical endurance had turned a near-impossible mission into a story of unparalleled heroism. Hacksaw Ridge would become a symbol of selfless service, demonstrating that the true measure of courage lay not in the taking of life, but in the saving of it. The aftermath of this engagement would extend far beyond the ridge itself, influencing military culture, inspiring future generations, and reshaping the understanding of heroism in combat. The conclusion of the Hacksaw Ridge assault marked the end of one of the most remarkable chapters in World War II for Desmond Doss. The battle was not over when the ridge was secured. It continued in the form of recognition, reflection, and the profound impact of his actions. Military reports confirmed that his unarmed heroism had saved over 75 men, many of whom would later attest that his presence had been the difference between life and death. Initially, there was skepticism within the Army. How could a soldier who refused to carry a weapon contribute meaningfully to combat operations? Doss's record on Okinawa provided the irrefutable answer. Commanders documented his evacuations meticulously. His acts were not impulsive or isolated. They were deliberate, repeated, and highly effective. Fellow soldiers provided statements emphasizing his bravery, discipline, and unwavering dedication to preserving life under extreme conditions. For his service, Doss received numerous honors. Most notably, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration, presented by President Harry S. Truman on October 12, 1945. He also earned a Bronze Stars and 3 Purple Hearts, acknowledging both his courage under fire and the injuries sustained while fulfilling his duty. The citations highlighted not only his physical heroism, but also the moral courage to adhere to his convictions in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. The recognition extended beyond awards. Doss became a symbol of moral heroism in wartime, demonstrating that valor did not require the taking of life. Stories of his courage circulated among military circles, newspapers, and eventually the public. He was lauded for proving that conscience, faith, and service could coexist with effectiveness in battle, even within the Japanese forces. Post-war accounts suggested that Doss's actions had caused confusion and awe. Commanders recognized the unusual phenomenon of a man operating unarmed, yet systematically undermining defensive positions. While they could not anticipate his methods during combat, they acknowledged the extraordinary impact on morale and the tactical environment. The immediate aftermath of Okinawa, therefore, was twofold: operational success for the 77th Infantry Division and the emergence of Desmond Doss as a historic figure. His story reframed the understanding of heroism in war not as a measure of destruction inflicted, but as the lives preserved against impossible odds. After World War II, Desmond Doss returned to Lynchburg, Virginia, where he sought a quiet life away from the battlefield. He married his childhood sweetheart, Dorothy, and resumed work as a carpenter, applying the same precision and care he had shown as a medic to the construction of homes and furniture. Though removed from combat, the experiences of war remained with him, etched into memory through scars both visible and invisible. Doss continued to live in accordance with his faith, attending church and participating in community service. He seldom sought the spotlight, yet his story gradually gained recognition. Veterans, historians, and educators highlighted his example of moral courage. In schools and military academies, His narrative became a teaching tool, proof that heroism could coexist with conscience, that one could serve both country and principle. The military also preserved his legacy formally. His Medal of Honor and the accounts of his actions at Hacksaw Ridge were studied as case examples in leadership, battlefield medicine, and ethical decision-making. Officers learned that courage could manifest in forms beyond direct combat, emphasizing protection, guidance, and care. His methods influenced training for medics, evacuation procedures, and the psychological understanding of heroism in high-risk environments. Globally, his story resonated as an emblem of nonviolent heroism. The Japanese, upon reviewing post-war records, recognized that Doss's unique approach had disrupted their expectations of warfare. It demonstrated that battlefield impact was not exclusively measured by offensive firepower. Strategy, psychological influence, and moral clarity could alter outcomes in subtle yet decisive ways. Doss passed away on March 23, 2006. At age 87, obituaries and memorials praised him not only as a soldier, but as a man of principle. His legacy transcended military history, offering a timeless example. One individual, guided by faith and conscience, could alter the course of events, save lives, and inspire generations. The consequences of his choices extended far beyond Okinawa. Desmond Doss proved that heroism could be defined by compassion and courage, a lesson that shaped military thinking, inspired civilians, and reshaped cultural understanding of moral strength in the crucible of war. The story of Desmond Doss challenges conventional notions of heroism. In a war defined by firepower, destruction, and sacrifice, he demonstrated that courage could exist without violence, and that faith could guide action in the most extreme circumstances. Hacksaw Ridge was not only a battlefield, it was a proving ground for moral resolve. Doss's life exemplifies the intersection of conscience and duty. While bullets and shells define the fate of others, his choices shaped the lives of those around him. Soldiers saved, morale sustained, and principles upheld. These were his victories. History remembers him not for the battles he fired upon, but for the lives he preserved. Beyond the immediate consequences of Okinawa, his legacy influenced the military and the broader world. Medics, soldiers, and civilians alike drew lessons from his courage. He became a symbol that one could remain steadfast in principle, even under the most lethal pressure, and that heroism was not measured solely by destruction inflicted, but by life saved. Desmond Doss's story remains a testament to human potential. It reminds us that character can transcend circumstance, that conscience can guide action, and that one individual's determination can ripple through history. In the smoke of war and the heights of Hacksaw Ridge, he demonstrated that the human spirit rooted in faith, courage, and compassion can achieve what might seem impossible. And in that enduring lesson, the meaning of his service continues. Heroism is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it in service to others.